Are women weak, emotional, indecisive, or evil? This idea is not yours. It is not even from your time. It is one of the oldest, most silent, and deadly lies in human history. It's called misogyny. That's misogyny. But how was this hostility born? Why has it become so persistent? And why does it still appear in different faces every day? The answers to these questions are not only about women. It also reveals humanity's fears, desires for power, and how it shapes social structures. Because misogyny is not just a hatred, it is a system, a point of view, and perhaps most importantly, a story that has been told for thousands of years. And this story is rewritten and retaught in every generation. Derived from the Greek words misogyny, meaning to hate, and gyne, meaning woman, at first glance, misogyny may seem like an individual prejudice. Yet throughout history, this word has infiltrated laws, religions, science, literature, language, and even humor, becoming one of the silent rules of social order. It is, in Jack Holland's words, the world's oldest prejudice. And to this I would like to add this. Misogyny serves not only women, but also the lie that humanity wants to tell about itself. Misogyny is rooted not only in social rules, but in the oldest narratives of humanity. Mythology is the subconscious of a civilization, where women have been identified with threat, chaos, sin, and disaster from a very early date. The most common narrative in belief systems is the punishment of women as soon as they seek knowledge, refuse to obey, or act of their own volition. Eve is the most well-known figure in this narrative. She breaks God's prohibition and offers the forbidden fruit to Adam. However, the real punishment here is not only for rebellion against God, but also for the woman's quest for knowledge. In this narrative, woman is identified with temptation instead of reason, seduction instead of obedience, and the result is the expulsion of all humanity from paradise. In other words, the curiosity of a single woman leads to a collective catastrophe. Pandora is framed in a similar way. In Greek mythology, Pandora is the first woman created by the gods to punish men. She is given a box and instructed not to open it, but Pandora cannot suppress her curiosity and opens the box. Thus, diseases, famines, wars, and all evils are unleashed on the world. Here too, woman is the source of disaster. Her weakness condemns all humanity to pay the price. The existence of woman is coded as a threat by its very nature. A lesser-known but much more radical figure is Lilith. She appears in Jewish mysticism and Mesopotamian myths, and is the first woman before Eve. She claims to be created equal to Adam, refuses to submit, and leaves paradise voluntarily. Lilith is later demonized, transformed into a night demon who kills babies. In other words, the demand for equality is identified with disobedience, and disobedience with demonization. Lilith does not only oppose man, she opposes the sacred order. And this is the narrative that justifies her darkness. Although these three mythological figures come from different cultures, they carry the same message. If woman is liberated, society collapses. If woman knows, wants, and chooses, disaster will come. Women's knowledge, will, and body are seen as elements that must be controlled, otherwise they will lead the world to destruction. These narratives are not only religious symbols, but also cultural codes that legitimize the suppression of women for centuries. Here, misogyny appears not only as a form of hatred, but also as a narrative of fear necessary for the maintenance of order. This mythological infrastructure becomes systematized in more institutionalized structures over time. The founders of ancient philosophy exclude women from reason. Although Plato recognizes a spiritual rite of passage for women, he sees the man as the bearer of true public reason. Aristotle, on the other hand, makes a sharper judgment. Woman is incomplete man. She is passive, cold, and subordinate to nature. These ideas become not only metaphysical interpretations, but also philosophical justifications for the education, property. This exclusionary view is not unique to the West. In the Indian Vedas, woman is defined as Maya, that is, an illusion. In China, Confucian morality reduces woman's greatest virtue to obedience. In Rome, women must always live with a male guardian, even if they have some rights. A woman's virginity, not her intellect, is trusted. That is why she is kept under constant surveillance. In other words, a woman's value is defined not as an individual, but as the bearer of an honor that belongs to someone else. These cultural codes, combined with religious discourses, create an even deeper rift. Early Christian thought sanctifies its fear of the female body and desires with theological dogmas. Tertullian declares woman as the devil's gate. Augustine says that a woman's mind is weak, even if he admits that her soul can be saved. Aquinas, on the other hand, defines woman as the man whom nature has wrongly molded. These definitions are not just sermons, they are also divine justifications for the systematic suppression of the female body, voice, and intellect. This suppression does not just remain in rhetoric, it becomes one of the darkest practices in history. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, the witch hunts in Europe were the bloodiest manifestation of misogyny. The book Malleus Maleficarum, or The Hammer of Witches, claimed that women were more prone to witchcraft because they were sensual, jealous, and irrational. In reality, the women targeted are healers, midwives, old women living alone, and those who do not conform to social norms. In fact, this is part of an information war. Women's experience, knowledge, and body are seen as a threat to the church's sole authority. Enlightenment. It was only for men. The age of enlightenment is the rise of reason, science, and progress, at least on paper. This period is full of the promise of humanity's liberation from ignorance. However, who is meant by humanity is rarely questioned, because reason and truth are considered to belong only to the male mind. Women are also excluded from this new era. Rousseau says that women can be educated, but only to be a good mother and wife. According to him, the woman's duty is to serve the man and ensure his peace of mind. Hegel argues that women cannot comprehend public life and can only find meaning in the family. In other words, the Enlightenment's ideal of equality does not apply to women. This exclusion continues not only in philosophy, but also in science. Developing in the 18th and 19th centuries, modern medicine, while making the female body a subject of research, also pathologizes it. The female body is defined as inherently problematic, unstable, and abnormal. In this period, hysteria, that is, symptoms such as uncontrolled emotionality, nervousness, seizures, are defined as a disease specific only to women. The root of the word hysteria, hystera, means womb in Greek. This in itself is an indication that everything identified with femininity is seen as a medical disorder. A woman's emotions, desires, and even her thoughts are explained by her womb. Her desire for more, her irritability, her productivity, or her resistance, all of these are classified as symptoms of a hysterical condition. And so, the woman's desire for emancipation is suppressed, this time not in a religious but in a scientific language. The woman who used to be the devil's gate is now, in the eyes of medicine, turned into an unstable ball of hormones. The form of repression changes, but the essence remains the same. The woman is still outside, still an entity to be kept under control. By the 20th century, women become subjects who write their own stories, not just listen to them. The growing feminist movements that began at the turn of the century constitute one of the strongest collective objections to misogyny. This objection does not take shape all at once, but in waves within historical contexts. The first wave of feminism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries focused on basic rights, such as suffrage, property, and citizenship. The suffragette movement fills the streets in the UK and the USA for women to participate in elections. Women are detained, go on hunger strikes, and are suppressed, but eventually win the right to vote in many countries. This was the first breakthrough when women became visible in the public sphere. However, women's demands for equality were not limited to the ballot box. The second wave of feminism rises with a new consciousness from the 1960s onwards. It is no longer just about laws. It is about domestic labor, sexuality, bodily rights, the right to abortion, and the invisible oppressive mechanisms of patriarchal society. Betty Friedan's The Mystery of Womanhood exposes a gap that many women experience but cannot articulate. Being a housewife, even if it is the ideal of society, destroys individual fulfillment and freedom. With the slogan, "The personal is political," this wave transforms domestic repression into a public issue. Issues such as women having a say over their bodies, the right to abortion, contraception, domestic violence, and harassment move to the center of the political sphere. With the 1990s, the third wave rises, and this time focuses on the diversity within the definition of woman. This period argues that feminism cannot be limited to the experience of Western, white, middle-class women. Black feminists, LGBTQ+ individuals, immigrant women, and women from different faith communities take the floor. Different experiences of womanhood along the axes of identity, culture, class, and sexuality become visible. The feminist movement is now polyphonic and multi-layered. This is also a critical turning point. It is a phase in which feminists must also confront their own presuppositions. The fourth wave rises out of the digital age. Shaped by the power of social media after the 2010s, this wave centers on the fight against online harassment, digital violence, sexist algorithms, and media representations. The Me Too movement transforms women's suppressed voices into a cry. This new field of struggle makes invisible violence visible. It shows that women struggle not only on the street, but also in the office, at home, and online. Although all these waves do not follow a single line, they share a common goal: women's right to own not only their bodies but also their lives, their will, and their voices. Feminist movements have given voice again and again against the structure of misogyny that changes faces but does not disappear. However, this struggle cannot completely eradicate misogyny, because hostility is constantly evolving. Today, it no longer appears in explicit bans or outright punishments, but often in marriage and work life, in sexist attitudes, or in the invisible filters of algorithms. And today, on the margins of the digital world, women are fighting on a new front. The incel movement, red pill ideology, male-dominated content on TikTok and YouTube are creating a systematic online lynching culture against women. A tweet, a video, a comment, these work like the digital version of witch hunts. It comes with the practice of collective punishment, not just discourse. At the end of all this, it is inevitable to ask the question, why is this hostility? The answer is perhaps hidden in the most basic fear. Hatred against women is actually hatred against change. Because when women change, society changes. Power changes hands. The usual power structures are broken, and this break has always been postponed throughout history. Misogyny is not only the dark mirror of women, it is the dark mirror of humanity. It may be difficult to look in that mirror, but there is no change without confrontation. That is why this story is not only the story of women, but of all of us. And we can only change by talking, trying to understand, listening to each other. Misogyny has not disappeared, but if we recognize it, we can neutralize it.